Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is William M. Smith, and today is April the 10th, 2021. I'm a retired engineer, and I've been retired about 20 years. I've been working with a group that I established in 1977 called THOR. THOR stands for the Hunters of Ohio Rock. And in a long and short about way, we study rocks that have pre-Columbian evidence. One of those is the Kensington Runestone. And we've studied detail for the last 20 years on the Kensington stone and why, and try to identify the 5 W's of that stone. Today, my focus is strictly on the runic letters on the Kensington stone and where they're found elsewhere in the United States. I will not be addressing many other findings. We've got ground lines, we've got declination, we've got words that I don't even understand. We're only going to be comparing these letters to these other stones, and there's 7 other stones that have the same letters that exist on the Kensington stone, except they're 1,000 miles apart. It's not our proof to prove the authenticity or the fake of the Kensington stone, but just to add information that we feel has not been presented before in a context as such. With that, I'm going to use basically one visual aid, and that is this matrix that you can see here. And what we've done is taken the Kensington runestone and listed in, this is just a numbering column, it goes up to 33. These dark letters are every symbol that exists on the Kensington runestone. To our knowledge, we've tried to copy them exactly as they were. And then we orientated them to the highest usage. Like this little T is used 25 times. The hooked X is 20 times. And so forth down the list until we get a couple down here that we got zeros by, and that's in the pendiatic number system. Now, to discuss these, we're going to start at the top. This little T, according to the translations of other experts that are more runic expert than myself, or our THOR group, represents the letter I or E. The problem we have is the letter E didn't exist in a lot of the ancient runic writings, and this, if it's an I, it exists as an I or an E. I'm going to take this top one across the row. This is the letter as it exists on the stone. It exists 25 times. It's either an I or an E as translated by the experts that translate its meaning. It exists 0 times on the other 7 stones that we've found. However, it is the only letter that exists on the Kensington stone and nowhere else on the East Coast. And not until we completed the list did we understand why. But we're going to hold that off for a little bit. I've got a little flip card that shows that I, and basically it's a hooked I. I call it a double hooked, and it's on the Kensington runestone 25 times, but there's also another I without a hook 11 times on the Kensington stone. So they used either I or E 36 times on the Kensington stone. Now, in the old alphabet, A, E, I, O, U, I was one of the most used languages in the English language or any language. So on Kensington, if they used an I 36 times, fits right into the usage on the other stones, which I'm going to hold off our translation until the last of this first letter. The second most used letter on the Kensington stone is called the hooked X. The hooked X is used 20 times on the Kensington runestone. It is used an additional 73 times on the East Coast stone. Here's 5 spirit pond stones, and then there is 2 amulets that were on necklaces we found, where the hooked X exists 93 times in America, and only in America. The THOR group has studied all 93 hooked X's, and you will see the carver was right-handed. He made his X like this, and then he made his mark like this. Now, as a retired toolmaker, engineer, expert, working most of my life in tooling, when you cut a line across the line, the latter line will leave the lines going all the way through, which indicates this was the first line, this was the second line. But the key to the hooked X, 93 times in America, is the hook itself. It starts on this line, not below it, not above it, but just a shade, I say a shade, less than 10% down from the top, and it points exactly the same direction as this. The hooked X is the cartographer or carver. Cartographer represents a navigational engine. It represents A in all 93 occurrences. But it also says when I make my X, and I'm talking about land, and I'm talking about mapping, everything I'm talking about, the compass needle is positive. It's a positive reading, and it's going to be this leg with the hook. The only time it's not going to be positive is when I go past 0 degree declination. Because in the 14th century and the 15th century, they used magnetic declination, that's the variance between true north and magnetic north, to determine where they were east and west, or longitudinally on the earth. So the hooked X on the Kensington Runestone and all the other stones says we are in East Finland, basically. Everything we're doing is east of us. If they had made this over in Utah, the hook would be, actually it's down here when we got a symbol representing the same thing from Drake's expedition in the 1500s out of California. The hook is down here. This is bringing up a new hooked letter symbol. That is my flip cards. Now, so we go over to this hooked X. It's used 32 times on one stone on the Spirit Pond, 18 on another, 5 on this one, 1 on this one, 16 on this one. It's also used at the Narragansett Bay Runestone to represent 17 degrees declination. It's a letter used. There's a combination of 8 letters. I won't go to that. The R exists 19 times. It represents R. It represents 11, 3, 9. And when I go across here, we do not have all of these stones translated on the Spirit Pond, but we do have 4 of them and the amulets. We have all but 1 translated, and the letters are used exactly the same. Now we come on down to this reverse F, if you want to call it. It's used 16 times here, 3. Keep in mind, most experts like Heinrich Williams, Dick Nielsen, have identified all of these letters on the Kensington stone, and what's got them confused, 7 of these letters are nowhere found in the runic European writings. But keep in mind that the person carving this was, like I said, the map maker, and he is pointing out and using symbols to represent positive declination. I'm going to say right now, 0 declination. And the reason I say that represents 0 declination and that represents Kensington location is because in 1472, Kensington was at 0 declination. In 1362, where the date is on the Kensington stone itself carved, that represents a cluster of stone holes 65 miles west of the Kensington location where that 0 existed in 1362. But when the carver of this rock carved it, we have support documentation. These were all carved by John Scolvus in 1472 on an expedition from Portugal and Denmark. John was the special cartographer appointed by the King of Denmark to travel with the fleet commander Joel Cordereal and from Portugal. They were to sail from the Azores, where Joel Cordereal was governor, with Pining and Podhorst, which was two captains from Danish ships. The three ships sailed first to Nova Scotia. Then they sailed to Newport, Rhode Island, where John Scolvus left the crew there, went with the two Danish ships. They went with the, actually there was 40 in the crew, along with some Native Americans in the 5 nations that helped them, and that's identified in these stones. They had guides. They had Indian guides to take them through the Hudson Strait, and they had Indian guides to tell them how much time they had before the straits froze back over. But John Scolvus did an expedition. He is noted worldwide for defining and locating the Arctic Circle. They also did that on this trip. This all explains that. And there is one symbol down here that represents the Arctic Circle and was not used on the Kensington stone. But there is 8 symbols that do not exist anywhere except on the Kensington stone. However, they do exist on all these other stones, and they're modifications that the carver made. I don't want to repeat myself because I want to focus. The matrix says you have 33 symbols on the Kensington stone, and only 3 of those have zeros, and these are the pentatonic numbers. But the funny thing about the pentatonic number, it goes from 1 to 9. It has no 0. So if I wanted to show you that the Kensington stone was on 0, what would I do? I would put a double hook on the eye, and that represents 0 declination. It says basically it's the same east and west. So it's 1. The compass needle is going to read the same as a true north and south needle. And I know we're not into declination and all that stuff. The symbols down through here, their meanings, this symbol right here is a inverted U on the stones over here, not on the Kensington stone, and that represents the Arctic Circle. If you look at the word on the map stone, on the Spirit Pond stone, the V is this letter for Vinland. All the other letters are the same as the Vinland letters on the Kensington stone. So this may be a guide, and it may be a help, and it may support the fact that the stone was carved at a different date. I want to kind of cut this off. If I go too far, you'll lose focus. All I wanted to focus on was we put a matrix together which consists of over 600 letters and symbols, numbers, even the AVM. They didn't use the AVM because they were talking about 10 men dead. I want to correct one thing about dead. The late David Johnson, who passed away, great THOR member, and the reason I want to get this out with him getting a lot of the credit is because David Johnson is the one that recently, I say recently, last 5 years, found that the word dead as translated on the Kensington stone is not dead, it's death. It does not represent hostilities with the Native Americans. It represents disease like the plague. I took my personal doctor to Kensington. We were in the area a week, and Mr. Jeffrey Baker, and Jeffrey Baker said the introduction of pneumonia would cause the 10 men dead with death and red in their face. It takes about 11 to 12 days for that to happen. Jeffrey explained that the last 2 days their face would turn red and they'd bleed at the nose and mouth. And this is what these stone says. We returned from camp one day and found 10 dead with red and blood. Then that makes a lot of people not stop looking for the Viking battle that took place according to legend. So little things mean a lot in a big story. This little matrix comparing American runestones means a lot to the Kensington translation, date, and proper recorded history. I hope ever who visualizes this or gets record of it recognizes THOR, the group that's been in place for a long time and still is, because we have a lot of data that tells not only about the trip to this, but also explains to the trip back to Europe and the rewards all the people got when they got there for placing this stone. And documentation of the voyage, it exists in many places. Most of all important is the 1494 treaty in Portuguese between Spain and Portugal. It explains we're going to build a tower on the east coast, and we're going to place a marker 370 leagues, or right at 1,110 miles, on a pole line west of the tower. It's where your stone stands today. I want to thank you for visualizing this short film, and I know it's not professional, but thanks to my daughter, Cheryl, we hope that you enjoy this. Thank you.